The army trained and strengthened that mighty organizing impulse which we found everywhere in the fatherland. The conviction that the subordination of the individual to the good of the community was not only a necessity but a positive blessing had gripped the mind of the German army, and through it that of the nation.
With Prussia as the core, the German Empire was the most powerful military organism in the world. And at its head, posturing, gesturing, stood the all-powerful Kaiser, challenging Europe.
Without Germany, and without the German Kaiser, no great decisions must ever be taken. If this should happen, the position of Germany in the world would vanish forever. And I do not purpose that this should ever happen. To employ suitable, and if necessary, violent means ruthlessly, is my duty, my fair privilege.
Germany's neighbors watched her clamorous progress with alarm. The Republic of France uneasily remembered her overwhelming defeat at Germany's hands in 1870. Then the rich lands of Alsace and Lorraine had been torn from her. Patriotic Frenchmen bitterly resented the loss, and the bitterness was passed on to new generations.
Think that the motherland is your second mother, that she weeps and suffers over the children they have torn from her bosom.
France had her iron, her coal, her industry, but the French were above all tillers of the soil. The produce of her fields and vineyards made France self-supporting. The French cared for good food. The specialities of each province acquired international fame. And while the ploughland and pastures of the provinces fed Paris, Paris itself fertilized not only France, but Europe too. The curiosity and enthusiasm of Parisians matched a period which seemed to produce new novelties every day. Louis Blériot was the first man to fly the Channel.
I began my flight steady and sure. I have no apprehension, no sensations, nothing. I am making at least 42 miles an hour, traveling at a height of 250 feet. Below me is the sea. There is nothing to be seen, neither France nor England. I am alone. For 10 minutes I am lost, and then I see the cliffs of Dover.
There were flying experiments of another kind, not so successful. Cranks or pioneers, the French greeted them all expectantly. A moving pavement was displayed at the exhibition of 1900. Looking down from it, Paris was truly sovereign of cities, seemliest in sight. The wide, bustling boulevards, the cafes, the Louvre, storehouse of Europe's treasures, the imprisoned sunshine of the Impressionists, the acting of Sarah Bernard, the Moulin Rouge, and the legs of Mistinguett, dinner at Maxime's. Picasso and Matisse were painting. In her quiet laboratory, Madame Curie was discovering radium. Paris was the Mecca of the West. But Paris is not France. The glamour of Paris did not reflect the deepest truths about the French. It encouraged their optimism, but it concealed unrest and violent agitation among the industrial classes, who felt left out of a rising tide of prosperity. It concealed the backwardness of French industry in a world where this counted more and more. It concealed a declining birth rate in a world which paraded its millions. It concealed the canker at the heart of French politics. memory of the defeat of 1870, and fear of the rising might of Germany. Because of this memory and this fear, the army played a special part in the life of France. Shattered in 1870, it had made a remarkable recovery. It became a national army based on universal conscription. It schooled itself in colonial wars, but its eyes were fixed on the German frontier. In 1914, there was a socialist government. Anti-militarism, pacifism, and internationalism were being proclaimed with swelling voices.
The delegates of the workers' organizations judge that wage earners obliged to go to war have this alternative only: either to take up weapons in order to menace other wage earners, or to take up battle against the common foe, capitalism.
Anti-militarist and anti-patriotic propaganda must become ever more intense and audacious.
Discordant voices in France, strident voices in Germany. For as Germany pursued the destiny preached by her thinkers, another neighbor took fright. The Germans were not content with military might and industrial supremacy. They still felt cheated. They wanted a place in the sun, an empire. Between 1884 and 1890, German sovereignty was proclaimed over an area more than 4 times larger than Germany herself. And on the pretext of protecting these colonies and her expanding trade, Germany began to build a battle fleet. This was a threat that any British newspaper reader could understand. The sea served Britain in the office of a wall or as a moat defensive to a house against the envy of less happier lands. Now envy was reaching across the sea. Winston Churchill spoke for all Britain when he said, "Our naval power involved British existence. If our naval supremacy were to be impaired, the whole fortunes of our race and empire would perish and be swept utterly away." Britain awoke to the truths of the 20th century. Reality jarred against the romantic image of merry England. Yet the image lived on, reinforced by the royal family in its role of country squire. Englishmen liked to think of themselves in these terms. They attached magical virtues to walking over fields. They also found virtue in royal pageantry, jubilees, coronations, state openings, funerals. The funeral of King Edward VII in 1910 provided a last glimpse of royal Europe in all its panoply. Nine kings followed Edward's coffin through the streets of London. King George V, his successor, the Kaiser, his nephew, the King of Belgium, the King of Spain, the kings of Portugal, Denmark, Bulgaria, Norway, and Greece. The watching, awe-struck crowds were reminded that Britain was the center of an empire on which the sun never set. The most glittering jewel of all was India. The great Durbar at Delhi in 1911 seemed to set the seal on British rule.
Wearing their purple coronation robes and preceded by attendants carrying peacock fans, yak tails, and golden maces, their majesties took their thrones and faced the tens of thousands of their subjects.
King George V wrote in his diary,
the most beautiful and wonderful sight I ever saw.